Hu Shuli. Hu Shuli is editor-in-chief of Caixin Media Group and dean of the School of Communication and Design at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou. Caixin is dedicated to providing high-quality, independent financial and business news and information through books, periodicals, and online. Hu Shuli graduated from the People's University of China with a degree in journalism in 1982. Since then, she has won international acclaim for her achievements in Chinese journalism. She was also Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford in 1994. Ms. Hu concentrates on development economics. Today, she will share with us some of her insights on China as a global media player. Please give a warm round of applause to Hu Shuli.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Carol. It's a privilege to speak to you here. The topic is China, which is in the spotlight on the world stage. However, beyond the focus lamp, there are shadows and shapes that only insiders understand. And that is what I hope to share with you today. China can be enigmatic. When I first traveled to the United States in 1987, foreign friends and acquaintances asked everything about the Middle Kingdom. Do people wear the same dark green or gray uniforms? Do you have access to outside information? Do you have choices in your life? Some of these questions sound funny today. The perception of China in the West has normalized tremendously thanks to the tools that make communications easier and the countries opening up to the rest of the world. Recently, a suggestion many years ago by a person who knew China very well got me thinking. I was a Knight Fellow at Stanford University in 1995. During that time, I often talked to a renowned journalism professor, Lyle Nelson, who used to work as an English expert at China Daily, the main official English newspaper in Beijing, in the 1980s, and always gave tremendous support to Chinese students. Before I finished my program, Professor Nelson thought about finding a job for me in the United States. I told him I would rather return to China. He understood and said, "Shuli, I respect your decision to go back to China, but it will be very hard for you. Chinese journalism will not be part of the mainstream international journalism." He had every reason to make that judgment. In 1995, Chinese media outlets were mostly state-owned. Serving as the government's mouthpiece was the form, although quite a few cautious journalists strived for serving the public's right to know. The economic sector of the country had opened up to the world, but the media sector had not. However, it was on the eve of a sea change. Professor Nelson passed away in 1997. It has always been a source of regret to me that this was before he could witness what my colleagues and I have done since 1998 and how fundamentally the media sector has shifted. China's economic and social development has opened many doors. Together with a group of young journalists, I established Caixin magazine in 1998, and 11 years later, we founded the Caixin Media Group. Our path has been a testimony to the hardships and opportunities of independent journalism in China, as well as the birth and growth of a market-oriented media sector in this country. In the past decades, our reports have uncovered rampant books behind legendary companies, the spread and cover-up of the SARS epidemic, and illegal privatization of state assets. Many of these stories changed the history and helped to shape important public policies that affect everyone's life. To be honest, China is a dreamland for journalists. There is never a shortage of stories, and stories can make immediate and real changes to individuals, to companies, to the country as a whole. Over a decade, we expanded rapidly, and China's newspaper people and media industry as a whole grew as well. The dynamics were primarily exciting in the finance sector and market-oriented media outlets. For instance, Caixin is frequently quoted by media outlets such as the New York Times, the Financial Times, Economist, the Wall Street Journal, and other mainstream international media. We even set up a content swap with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. We are indeed part of the mainstream media in the world stage. Two factors played a key role in the growth. China's rapid opening up in general and the growth of the internet in particular. In my view, the growth of internet companies, most of them are privately owned, has had the largest impact on Chinese media. Changed the landscape of media in China, put independent media center stage with the general public, and revealed the possibility for startup to grow dramatically. But it's too early to say that we have a rosy future in front of us. While regulatory intervention is ebbing, commercial interests pose a danger. Business coverage is becoming nuanced and tricky. A story about our star reporter illustrates this well. In 2000, 24-year-old girl Lin Huawei graduated with a major in finance and chose to work not for a bank but for the press. In her second year with a Security Weekly magazine, she identified a listed company with fishy financial records and started to investigate. Her investigation continued for half a year until she found plenty of evidence that the company very likely had cooked its books. But her editor stopped her from going on for fears of repercussion. Lin immediately quit the magazine, approached me about a job, and presented her investigative plan. Weeks later, she found evidence that absolutely proved the company's fraud. The story was printed, company officials were jailed, the firm's stock price collapsed, and securities regulators amended the policies. In the US, you might think of Enron. In China, it was called Yin Guangxia. Lin Huawei made the history. Lin is now the deputy managing editor of Caixin in charge of finance desk news. Compared to 10 years ago, there is much better access to government information, stricter rules on company disclosure, and the Chinese business have more links to the rest of the world. Despite this, Li and her team face new challenges that are more complicated, but equally even more important. For instance, Caixin broke a story about risks accumulating in China's local financial platforms and banks. From the 2008 financial crisis, Chinese government has put a lot of money into the country. Then the Chinese local financial, there's a very relaxed lending situation, and so they accumulated risk in the tens of trillions of yuan was doubting and on a cliff's edge. If it broke loose, it could easily inundate China's major lenders. The other exclusive Lin Huawei and her team discovered recently was about the media itself, about the financial press blackmailing pre-IPO companies, asking for advertisement fees in exchange of favorable reporting. It's especially dangerous, not only because public companies were squeezed, but also this behavior fundamentally corrupted the society. It can easily be used as an excuse to clamp down on media freedom as well. China's society will suffer from any further erosion in the media's role as watchdog. The last story I want to mention is about the high-speed railway, which was cited in Barack Obama's State of the Union speech as a spontaneous moment. The expansion looked so legendary that it took a crash and 40 deaths to show us what was behind it. Namely, this was a heavily monopolized industry that saw officials negotiate inflated deals on behalf of the companies that they benefited from. An industry that dressed up foreign technology and called it homegrown. An industry that pushed the design capacities to the extreme for meet political ambitions at the expense of public safety, and above all, an industry that refused any outside scrutiny. We have followed the story for 2 years and it's still unfolding. The story is a great example of the gaping hole between the world's perception and the reality. If my professional life over the last 3 decades allowed me to witness China's rise and the birth and expansion of market-oriented media, then my younger colleagues are watching as the country enters what we call deep water, a world of complex pictures, diverging opinions, changing social values, and the rise of interest groups that have the potential to hijack the benefits of reform and opening up. If significant reforms are made in the coming years to several key areas, the rule of law, government transparency, and market liberalization, to name just a few, China may enjoy a boost similar to when it joined the WTO or allowed farmers to migrate to cities to work in the factories. On the other hand, if you don't see fundamental treatments for some chronic illness defaming the country's institutions and policies, there is a very real danger that China will move backward and the fruits of decades of development wiped out. However, many people are trying hard to move China to the right track, including media outlets like Caixin. We hope that and work very hard towards that hope. That's where the future of China lies. That's where the business opportunity for you lies. For multi-internationals, China has been and will continue to be an attractive market. But it is important to bring in the best practice and avoid a double standard. Indeed, the country is under transition and corruption is rampant, and the rule of law is far from being established. Given the complexity of the Chinese market and the power of vested interests, it's very tempting for a few foreign companies to team up with those in power and call this the Chinese way. Corruption cases involving renowned foreign companies make headlines sometimes. However, complying with corruption is both wrong and dangerous. It will not only incur legal liabilities, but also jeopardize a company's long-term growth in China. Sometimes even risks the acceptance in the society. Spend time in China, and you can tell public scrutiny is on the rise, and people watch business integrity closely. My suggestion to foreign business in China is what I think the most important social responsibility: being honest, transparent with high integrity. These are journalists' observations of China on the world stage today and how the world should view it. The country has been lucky to enjoy a demographic dividend and a policy of opening up, and this has benefited the media sector as well. But looking forward, only a so-called system dividend coming from political, economic, and social reforms can be even more rewarding and powerful than engines that propelled this train forward, bring with it the economic, political, and social force for development. And only these reforms can make China a real star in the world that people, both at home and abroad, can look up to not just for its economic might, but for prosperous modernization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hu. And I think I'll just accompany you over to the chairs, perhaps, if we could. Thank you for the presentation. We'll come over here to the chairs just for a couple of questions. Ms. Hu has agreed to answer a couple of questions before we wrap up this session. So if you'd like to just take a seat right here. Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. Now, one of the things I think the audience would probably like to know the most, did you want to have a piece of paper? No. Absolutely.
Okay.
Got the paper, there we go. Whoops, thank you. And here's a magazine. There we go. Ms. Hu, you publish stories that other people wouldn't dare touch in China. And as you say, you walk the line between the permissible and the prohibited. Why is it that you managed to publish those kinds of stories unscathed, despite such an aggressive, muckraking reporting style?
Actually, there are several factors we handled very well. Number one is we publish only the facts, only the truth. We double-checked or even triple-checked. We always believe if we work as hard as our counterparts in Western countries, even harder you have to work, and we get all the solid facts. There's no reason to say we did something wrong, and either the people or the government need to know it. So the facts are number one. Number two is that we wait if it's between the importance and risks. If there are risks, then also we think if it's important enough, either way, finally it will get published. It should be transparent. Like we published the stories about SARS, which is an epidemic. We started and we did a lot of investigation. We sent a reporter go to the hospitals everywhere where no media, no other reporters dare to go for political restriction, not for others. But we believe that it's something, finally it could get transparent because everybody need to breathe, right? It's something about the human, about the life, yeah. So we think if something is seems very risky, but also cannot be that important, sometimes we avoid it. But if it's important enough, we don't care about the risk. Number three is we think only about news, not about the boundaries. It's very common in China. Editors think if we can publish it or not. Self-censor even before the editorial decision, even before they have the assignment to the reporters. We don't do that because if you decide to sign reporter, it means you have to pay for the transportation, for the accommodation, for everything. So, and also, if reporters, the stories couldn't get published, the reporters complained. So editors start to self-censor, even from the assignment. But we don't do. Every time, with everything, we value only about the news value. We consider about news. If it's important enough with news value, we do it, just do it, and we publish it. Because it's important to don't put some boundary in front of yourself, because the boundary is moving and invisible. Also, there are some very specific techniques, because right now, actually, nobody knows what is going to happen, because it's a internet world now. So we just, if to be fast is very important. So something happened, we put it in the news, and fast, it gets on. So the authorities have no reason to say, oh, you cannot do that, because they didn't say we were not able to do that. That is kind of like a game between, can say, mouse and cat.
Cat and mouse. It's widely written that one of your greatest strengths is this sixth sense for knowing when a story is too controversial. How is it that you know when and just how far to push? And
actually, just I said, there's no secret. I think that is like I think there are more news in China than journalists.
But which topics would be taboo?
Many topics. It's different from what you are working for, because we have a reporter. We used to have a very young reporter. She wasn't that satisfied with everything in China, and she got like a 1 month fellowship, and she went to the United States. It was during the Enron and the WorldCom period, and she went to the United States, traveled around, and she came back. She said, "Shuli, I decided to work in China as a journalist. I'm happy." I said, "Why?" He said, "Everywhere news office, they talk the same thing. Everywhere. The Enron, the WorldCom, nothing new, nothing special. But in China, you see so many different news, so many tough news. As I said, it's a dream time for journalists being in China. So it's hard for me to say, we need some special sense. Just do it. There's so many news every day. Even you have vacation, except like in the Spring Festival, that is 7 days vacation. There's no news during the vacation most of the time, but there are news in the United States, maybe, in the world, but not in China. But most of the time, like every day, there are big news, every day. So we don't feel hungry for not having news. So we don't have to be that, we don't need that much sense to think. Just do it in a professional way.
That's respecting a very clear set of rules. Much of business in China is governed by the concept of something that's called guangxi, which describes the basic dynamic in personalized networks of influence. How important is it for Western organizations to get the right guangxi if they want to do business in China?
I think, as I suggested in my talk, I think to be decent, to be honest, is very important. Because Chinese, there are a lot of very bad habits, bad sides of the culture in China, but the people do hate it, do dislike it. If they saw an international company behave it as a mirror of themselves, they wouldn't feel happy. They wouldn't feel, accepted because we are the same. They feel, why we have the bad side, and you learn from our bad side, take advantage of it. They got even more upset, and it cannot last long. I noticed that Westerners are sometimes very confused and don't know whether they have to compromise in certain stage. I remember in 1995, once I came back from the States, and I didn't get a job that time, very short time, about several months. I stayed at home 1 month, and a new joint venture started in China. They asked me to help them to do some preparation, and by the suggestion by some PR company, they prepared some very expensive gift, a gold, some gilded. I said, don't do that. Don't do that. I think that if you give the reporters such kind of stuff, you're not respected. It's a business. You're not just tell them the serious news. That was like that was my suggestion. Even that time. Right now, I still suggest this way. And finally, that company becomes very, very well-known, very famous, and with a lot of news. And they have never done this. Like that is CICC, a joint venture with the China Construction Bank and Morgan Stanley. But even the beginning, PR recommend them to do. So that is, I think, real big, confident, and decent business. Don't have to do something like under table. That like just short-term return maybe, and it's very easy to like to damage the reputation.
In terms of reputation, perhaps for this crowd of communicators here today, as a last question, your address book of contacts is reputably one of the biggest in the entire country. So perhaps you could just tell us what's your secret when it comes to networking and to establishing all of those hard-won contacts.
No secret, actually, just because I'm old. I want to hide it, actually.
You're not
but
that old.
But it's true, because China actually is a kind of like, this country everywhere is startup. If you meet people when they were still not in that position, you knew them already. It become friends. You didn't expect they become like powerful, something like that. You get more friends. Mm-hmm. Then they become powerful. They say, oh, why she knows this, why she knows that. I didn't know them. After they become like, just when everybody was ordinary. And so I think I get some, you said like, just because I'm old. But however, I haven't and don't intend to develop some personal relations with like I think journalists should keep certain distance. with your sources, right? So I don't have a lot of like personal like have dinner together or spend vacation or never. It just we know you before and just don't. I always feel we are the same. We are equal, no matter you're promoted or get rich or surrounded with a lot of people try to flattering or something like that. I'm always the same, confident and to be equal. Always remember I'm the king without crown. So that's the way to get respect. And also, I think behave well. That's okay.
Hu Shuli, thank you very much for those insights and for being here with us today.